I made a mistake. It was a bad mistake. And I dreaded what I had to do next. I had to go tell my boss what I had done wrong. I was working for a man named Jack Wilson. He's a CPA in Louisville, Texas, and the account that I was working on was for a medium-sized air freight company out of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And the mistake that I had made was going to, well, it represented thousands and thousands of dollars in taxes. And I just wished that I could do something different, but I knew what I had to do. I had to go into his office and explain to him what I had done wrong. Have you ever been in a situation like that before? You just dreaded it. You knew it wasn't going to be good. And you wish you could go back and do it all over again. What's going to happen when we miss the mark, when we fall short? I wondered. I thought, well, I'll at least lose the account. I won't be working with them anymore. And maybe I'll lose my job. And I began to plot and scheme and wonder what I was going to do without a job. Have you ever had that feeling that you have fallen short, that you've missed the mark with God? And you wonder, well, have I marred my relationship with the Lord? How can I face it anymore? I dread going and praying, and maybe we avoid it after that. It's tough to miss the mark, but if you're like me, it happens every now and then. And we come this morning to a gentleman that had an incident in his life where he missed the mark. He fell short. His name is Isaac. Let's look at him for a few moments. Would you join me, please, in Genesis chapter 26 in your Old Testament, Genesis 26 and starting in verse 7. Get your bulletin out, turn it over. We'll write down a couple of things as we go along, take a couple of notes, see if we can't learn something from Isaac and his mistake. Verse 7 says this in the NIV, when the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, she's my sister. Because he was afraid to say, she's my wife. He thought the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah because she is beautiful. Now the man in question here is Isaac. He's the son of the great patriarch of faith, Abraham. He's living almost some 4,000 years ago. Abraham has passed from the scene, and now Isaac is the center of attention in the story of God's grace. He's the son of promise. He had recently been faced with a famine. And in that part of the world, when things got tough, the place to go was Egypt. It was just natural. Everyone did that when you needed water. And so he was preparing to go to Egypt, and God appeared to him and challenged him. And he said, I don't want you to go to Egypt like everybody else. I want you to go where I tell you to go. I want you to trust me enough to do what I say, even though it goes against your intuition, even though it goes against what everyone else is doing, even though it goes against common knowledge and common practice. I want you to trust me. And Isaac did. He did trust God. He stayed in the land where he was. And that was a great act of faith on his part. His dad, before him, Abraham, even he failed that test. There was a famine when he was alive, and he went down to Egypt, and things didn't work out too well. And so Isaac, in a sense, is doing better than his father. And at the same time, God gave him the promises that had been given to Abraham a generation before. God spoke them personally to Isaac. And in a sense, he was saying to Isaac, you realize, of course, don't you, that you are the man of promise now. That the promises have passed down to you. The promises to make Abraham's family great and his name great and to multiply the descendants and to bless them and to bless the world. All that's yours now. So that was a great honor for Isaac to be given those promises personally by God. And he trusted God. But now he falls into an old mistake that his father also made. His father, when he went down to Egypt, was also afraid of the men around because his wife also was a beautiful woman, Sarah. And so he did the same thing. He lied about her. He said, oh no, she's not my wife. She's my sister. He was trying to protect himself because he was afraid that the wicked men of the world would kill him and dispose of him so that they could come and have his wife. So instead of risking himself to protect his wife, he risked his wife to protect himself. I've really enjoyed our discussions on Sunday evening this year. Earlier, we talked about the instructions in the Bible to Christian wives. Wives, submit to your husbands. Woo, that gets a good conversation going. And we had a good one. I thought we could do it in one night, but crazy me, it took at least a couple of weeks to get it all out and talk about it. And then a few weeks later, just recently, we talked about husbands. And as I studied that, I thought, the text says, husbands love your wives, and so that should probably be the title of the teaching. But somehow that just doesn't have the panache, it doesn't have the punch that wives submit to your husbands does. You know, people get charged up over that. They don't seem to get too charged up about husbands loving their wives. But I kept looking at the text and I said, really what this text is asking husbands to do is to love them the way Jesus loved the church. And the way Jesus loved the church is he died for the church. And I said, oh, now there's the title to the series. Husbands, die for your wives. Yeah, I got those looks from people's faces that I was looking for. Okay. I guess I better come and listen to that. What's that all about? We had a good conversation as we talked about the relationship between husband and wife in a Christian family, in a Christian marriage, what God expects of us. But toward the end of the discussion with the men, one of the things that we talked about was that idea of sacrifice. And toward the end of the discussion, a gentleman raised his hand. I won't embarrass him by calling his name. And he said, I just want to make an observation. And I said, sure, go ahead. He said, you know, when we talked about wives submit to your husbands, all the women did all the talking. And then when we talked about husbands die for your wives, all the women did all the talking. And I said, yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that. But one of the things that we said in the outline about husbands was that God calls those of us who are Christian husbands to put our wife before our life. To put our wife before our life. Not all just one time, but always. Isaac was having a hard time with that. Isaac put his life before his wife. Whether or not he learned that from his dad, I don't know, but he's following in his dad's footsteps here. They're not good footsteps. And so one commentator I read this week tried to put a little nicer sounding word on it. Here's a good word. He prevaricated. He prevaricated. That's a good word, isn't it? If you want to tell somebody that they've lied, but you want to be a little nicer and sound a little more like you're using a $50 word, tell them, well, you prevaricated, didn't you? And they'll say, I'm not sure. Is that legal? He lied. I noticed this week in the news there was 4 gentlemen, 4 young guys who in Chicago were in the Willis Tower in Chicago. I didn't realize this, but you know, in the Willis Tower they have this glass box. There's actually 2 of them that protrude from the tower 103 stories off the ground. That's over 1,300 feet in the air. It's a glass side, a glass top, and a glass bottom. So that you can literally walk out as if you're standing in the air over the city of Chicago looking outside. I'm sure it's a stunning view, one that I'll never see. And Alejandro and his brother and 2 cousins were enjoying that view, and they heard a cracking noise. And they looked down and they saw the evidence of cracks beneath their feet. Well, as you can well imagine, they quickly got out of the box and back to safety, as far away from the box as they could. And I love the video of the news story. They were talking to Alejandro about that, and he said, well, I guess fear just took over. And I said, yeah, it did, and it would for me too. My fear would take over before I ever walked out there. But sometimes fear takes over, doesn't it? And we just do crazy things. In their case, that wasn't crazy. But sometimes fear makes us do irrational things. And Isaac, it says that he was afraid. His fear took over. And fear has a tendency of canceling out what? Faith. Fear cancels out faith. it drains the faith from us. Instead of fearing, as in respecting the Lord and wanting to do what He calls for, we fear something else, some threat in the world, whatever it may be. We have to choose between the two sometimes. We have to choose whether we're going to respect, revere, and obey God, or whether we're going to fear the things of the world, because they come in conflict with one another. And that's what happened with Isaac here. He chose to lie to protect himself. Here's the first thing that I'd like for us to write down this morning. The first question here is, why didn't Isaac trust God? You know, in a sense, you got to love Isaac, and people like him in the Bible because he is a man of faith. He had just demonstrated great faith in God, and then he turns right around and makes this huge error. And it's a reminder that we can be people of faith and we can make mistakes sometimes. We don't want to. We shouldn't. We try not to. But even men like Isaac and Abraham, people like Peter and Matthew and others, made mistakes. One moment their faith is strong, the next moment it is weak. Why didn't Isaac trust God? Well, very simply, Isaac feared himself more. Now watch the second part of this sentence. If you think about it, it may not make complete sense at first. Isaac feared for himself more than he cared for others. There's a lot more than meets the eye in that sentence. What that question and that answer says is that there's a relationship between our faith in God and how much we care for other people. In the Bible, we see that that's absolutely true. The more we follow God, the closer we get to God's heart, the more we know who He is, the more we just naturally, or maybe I should say supernaturally, find that we care about other people. If we struggle with caring about other people, then we'll struggle having faith in God, because God is always pushing us out. When we put our faith in Him, He's saying, if you want to follow me, then you have to be the kind of person, the kind of man, the kind of woman that loves other people and cares for other people and puts other people first before yourself, especially your wife. Put your wife before your life. Rebecca was special. She had been chosen by God particularly. Specifically in Genesis 25, we read that there was a sort of a miraculous circumstance that brought her to him. And he knew this. She should have been so precious to him that he would risk anything for her. But fear caused him to react in the wrong way. So what happens? Verse 8, when Isaac had been there for a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife, Rebekah. Uh-oh. That cat's out of the bag. Notice here, though, that says he'd been there for a long time without any problems, which demonstrates that his fears were unfounded. Nobody came after Rebekah as he expected them to. They were unharassed, unmolested. They were able to live their lives. Verse 9, so Abimelech summoned Isaac and he said, she's really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister? Isaac answered him, because I thought I might lose my life on account of her. How embarrassing. Called on the carpet. Caught. Have you noticed something about God? He doesn't let His people live a lie for very long. He might let us get away with it for a little while, but eventually it comes out. And after a while, you go through this a few times with God, and you get to the point where you start thinking about lying, and you stop and you say, oh, wait a minute. The last time I did that, I thought I was getting away with it, and it came out. Maybe I should think twice. Because I did give my life to the Lord, and the Lord is in control of my life, and yet I know that He doesn't like it when I prevaricate. And so He's going to tend to jump right in there and unprevaricate me. Verse 10. Then Abimelech said, what is this you've done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. You know, what's amazing, one of the amazing things that I've learned about the ancient Near Eastern world is that they considered adultery to be, quote, the great sin. The great sin. Did you know that? In the ancient world, they considered adultery to be the great sin. Now, I've been told by my friends who believe in evolution and that God doesn't exist, that humanity is evolving, that we're getting better. that we're getting stronger, that we're getting smarter, and all those other things. And I look around and I say to myself, I don't see the evidence for that. I don't see the evidence for that at all. I don't think humanity is progressing, especially not morally, ethically, and spiritually. The 20th century was one of the worst on record. I don't see any evidence that we're moving forward. In fact, if anything, it seems like we're kind of slipping back. If in the ancient Near Eastern world they understood the sanctity of marriage and how important it was to leave another man's wife alone and how important it was to be faithful and true to your own family, then maybe we've lost some ground somewhere. Maybe we're devolving, at least morally, ethically, and spiritually. They thought that adultery was the great sin. And so this king is angry at Isaac. Nothing has happened. Nobody committed adultery with Rebekah. He's angry that Isaac even put them in a position where it might have happened. Does anybody care anymore? Does anybody care in our culture that somebody might commit adultery? Does anybody care? Well, apparently Abimelech did. Isaac should have. And here's the pagan king showing up, the man of God. Well, there's a lot we can say about that, isn't there? Like a lot of my friends would say, that'll preach. But when it does, it hurts. Are the people of God today falling short of the moral and ethical and spiritual witness that we're supposed to have to the world? Have we missed the mark? Well, Isaac did, and the king was upset. He was worried about guilt. The NIV says guilt. The Hebrew word probably emphasizes more the retribution, the consequences of it. He knew that when adultery happens, that there are consequences. Bad things happen. And so you avoid it at all costs. And he also knew, notice he said, us. You almost brought this guilt on us. Who's he talking about, us? He's talking about the community. He's talking about his people. He realized, which apparently we've forgotten also, that when you erode the family, that you erode the community. You destroy the culture. And Abimelech, of all people, this pagan king, realized, we don't do that around here. If you're going to be with us, you need to act right. Okay? Isaac must have been just looking at his feet at this point. He doesn't have anything else to say after this. He's ashamed. And he ought to be. Because he hasn't represented God well in this particular situation. Isaac had just been given the promise. And part of the promise was, God said, I am going to bless you. But listen up. Don't stop listening now. I'm going to bless you so that you will be a blessing to others. Church, we must never forget that God has blessed us. But we also must never forget that He has blessed us, not just for us to enjoy those blessings, although that's fine, but He's blessed us so that we will bless others. If we take all of God's blessings and we gather them in and we hold on to them and we protect them and we refuse to share them, then we're in a bad situation. Because that's not what God calls us to do. As we get a blessing, it multiplies and we share it with others. See ourselves in the position of Jesus, breaking the bread and giving it away. We may be afraid, well, if I give this blessing away, then what will I? God gave me another one. How about that? Well, if I give this blessing away, then what will I have? Well, how about that? God gave me another. I see how this thing works. I just keep giving blessings away, and God just keeps giving me more and more. But if I stop, He stops. Isaac was concerned about losing his blessings. You know, a lot of us have seen, unfortunately, Christian leaders who have failed morally and sometimes destroyed churches. You've read about them. I've known them. I've seen. Karen and I worked in a church where there was a failure, a type of moral failure in the leadership, and the church was destroyed. A church that we served for over 7 years, and our blood, sweat, tears, and heart were in it, and it was rough to watch what happened in a period of a year as it was just ripped apart, and as people fell away. And then a year later, we had, through the grace of God, we were able to come back and minister there and see healing take place. But I will never forget the looks in the people's faces. They will stay with me for the rest of my life. As I went out and I began to visit the families of the people who had left that church, because of what had happened. And I began to talk to them, and I began to make promises to them, and I began to try to persuade them to come back and to worship there at that church again and to join with us once more to serve the Lord. And I saw the skepticism in their face, but I saw something else. There was more than just skepticism in their face. There was pain in their faces. And that hurt me in my gut to realize that that church had hurt people, God's people, and had caused them to wander away from the work of God. And it scares me to this day. I don't ever want to see that again. I don't ever want to see that look in anybody's face. But all of us have known Christian leaders who have failed. And it's a bad thing. Even when an individual Christian, you might be thinking, oh, I'm glad I'm not a Christian leader. Well, it doesn't matter. If you're a Christian, somebody's watching you. Somebody's watching you. Your children are watching you. Your neighbors are watching you. Your coworkers are watching you. And when we fall, the world celebrates. And it hurts the cause of Christ. Now, there's good news coming, so stay with me, all right? But I want to emphasize how important our witness is. Think about Miriam Abraham. We've been following her, haven't we? She's arrested. She's 8 months pregnant. She's put literally in chains in a prison. And her husband isn't allowed to see her. And she's told that she's going to be executed. And she could get those chains off, be back with her husband, walk out of that prison if she just does one simple thing. It's apparently simple. All she has to do is what? Renounce her faith in Jesus Christ. That's it. All she has to do is renounce her faith in Jesus Christ, and she walks right out of that prison. What does she do? She says, I can't do it. I can't. If it means that I die, then I die. And she stays right there in that prison. Now, good news has come out. It looks like maybe she's going to be set free, but she didn't know that was going to happen. As far as she knew, when she made that confession of faith, that was the end of her life. If she had renounced Jesus and walked out of that prison, we would never have known her name. You would never have seen her picture on the internet. She would just be another forgotten person that gave up on the faith. But because of her strong witness, think about the millions of people who have seen her face and heard her story and been encouraged by her faith. I don't know about you, but I've been encouraged by her faith. She lifted me up. My heart went out to her. She's a sister in the Lord. And she made me ask myself this question. How about you? I had to ask myself, if I were in her shoes, what would I have done? Would I be willing to give up my life for my faith? Well, at any rate, Isaac was struggling. He's having a bad day. Here's the second thing on our outline. Why was Isaac's lie so bad? You know, a lot of people would say, hey, what's the big deal? He's just doing what he thought he needed to do to protect himself. A lot of people would say today about adultery and some of the things we're talking about, what's the big deal? Who cares? Well, God cares. Why was Isaac's lie so bad? Well, because God chose Isaac to be a blessing, and he was almost a curse. He was almost a curse. That's strong language, but that's the way Abimelech saw it. He was down on Isaac. He said, you almost cursed the community. You almost caused us to fall into adultery. And he knew better than to think that that was a good thing or that it was a morally neutral thing or any of that. Verse 11, so Abimelech gave orders to all the people. Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. I'm not sure that Isaac deserves the protection that he just got from Abimelech, but he got it. He got protection. Abimelech says, he put out an edict or whatever it is that he did, and he said, this man, these strangers who are living among us, leave them alone. Don't touch them. Leave him alone. Leave her alone. Don't harass them. One of the things that I wonder about in this text is God. Why did he speak one time and not speak another time? In the first 6 verses, he goes to Isaac and he says, don't go down to Egypt. Stay here. I'll take care of it. And so Isaac did. Why didn't God come and talk to him before he lied about his wife? Why didn't God come and appear to him again and say, you know, the first time he said, I know you're thinking about Egypt, don't go there. Why didn't God come back and say, I know you're thinking about lying about your wife, don't do that? Why didn't God do that? I'm scratching my head and then it dawned on me, really the answer is quite simple. Why in the world should God have to come and tell me not to lie? Have I got that low that I have to have God tell me every time that I'm fixing to sin that I need to stop that? I mean, going down to Egypt was not an obvious sin. It was just a matter of faith. And so God did appear to him, and he said, don't go to Egypt. But Isaac should have known better than to lie about his wife. He should have known better than to put his life before his wife. And so God gave him the freedom to make the mistake so that he could correct him. I don't like this part. I'd rather God stop me before I make the mistake instead of letting me make the mistake and then making a fool out of it. Well, I'm sorry. God didn't make a fool out of me. Who made a fool out of me? I did. So I can't blame him. I can get mad at God and say, why didn't you tell me it was going to be all right? It's your fault I lied. Adam and Eve tried to do that. It didn't fly very good. We can't blame God, can we? We know better. And so God didn't need to appear to him and tell him not to lie. Well, I guess at this point we could say that Isaac's 2 for 3. He's still better than 50%. If he was a batter, he'd be doing pretty good. You know, because Abraham and Sarah, when they didn't have a baby, they went out and got Hagar and caused all kinds of a mess in their family. But Isaac, when he and Rebekah didn't have a baby, he got down on his knees and he asked God what was going on, and they were blessed. So he did better than his father. Abraham, when the famine came, he went down to Egypt. But Isaac, when the famine came, he stayed and he trusted God. So he was doing good, but now we've got a problem. You know, Abraham lied about his wife, and now Isaac lied about his wife. So he was back 100%. We got a strike. We got a strike. Does that mean that if he strikes 2 more times, that he's out? Is it 3 strikes and you're out with God? Well, when we continue with the story, next time, God willing, we're going to see right away in verse 12 that God blessed Isaac. A lot of people look back and go, wait a minute, the man lied. Now why are you blessing him? Well, he was embarrassed. He was called on the carpet. God did correct him. But that wasn't the end of the story. I don't know about you, but aren't you glad to hear that? That was not the end of the story. Just because he swung once and missed the ball. Here's the third thing I want you to write down. What did God do about it? Well, he corrected Isaac. He didn't just let it go and say, oh, it's okay, Isaac, I understand. No, he needed to be corrected, and he was. But here's the thing. He continued blessing him. That's the part I like. He continued blessing him. I guess I haven't really been paying close enough attention because when this woman died recently, Maya Angelou, I didn't know who she was. Maybe some of you did. But when she died, and her face is all over the place, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I was supposed to know who she was, and I didn't. So I began reading about her and found out that she was a poet and had all kinds of artistic abilities and influenced the culture and all of these things. And I was reading about Maya Angelou, and in a quote, a recent quote of hers before she died, caught my eye. Here's what she said. She said, I'm trying. By the way, did you know she lived in Stamps, Arkansas for a while? I thought that was pretty cool. I'm always amazed, Maya said, when people walk up to me and say, I'm a Christian. I always think, already? You've already got it? I'm working at it. And at my age, I'll still be working at it at 96. If I'm here, I'll be trying to be a better human being, a better writer, a better friend, and a better beloved. I'm trying to be a better Christian. The more I thought about that, the more that bothered me. That's misleading. There's something wrong about that. The part about trying to do better, I like that. And if Maya were here, maybe she could help me understand what she meant by that. So I'm not going to assume she was wrong, but what she said strikes me the wrong way, and here's why. Christianity in the Bible means that we become part of a family. It is represented as adoption. That when we put our faith in Jesus Christ, we're adopted into the family of God. Now, when I was born, I was given a name. One of the names, only my parents could say for sure what it was going to be, and they decided it was Richard Lee. But the other name, everybody could have guessed before I was ever born. They could have guessed what that name was going to be. What was it? Foster. Why? because I was born into the foster family. I am a foster child. I have never had to try to be a better foster. No matter what I do, where I go, or who I am, I'm a foster. There may be some people in my family that wish I weren't a foster. There's nothing I can do about it. I can represent the foster family well, or I can represent them not so well, but I cannot change the fact that I'm a foster. And that's exactly what Christianity is. When you put your faith in Jesus Christ, and I put my faith in Jesus Christ, we are named by the name of Jesus. We are sealed by His Holy Spirit, and nobody can take that away from us. Nothing we do can take that away from us. We can represent Jesus poorly. We can fail. But nobody can take away the fact that I belong to Jesus. I am now a Christian. And so I would be one of those people that walked up to Maya Angelou and said, I am a Christian. That may have bothered her, but it's true. It's true. And if you put your faith in Christ, you are a Christian. You might be a bad Christian, a mediocre Christian, a good Christian, but you're a Christian. And nobody can take that away from you. And that's why God continued to bless Isaac, because the minute God said, I have chosen you, you're mine, that was it. There's no changing that. And the minute that God said to you, I've chosen you, you're mine, that's it. No changing that. Oh, by the way, I did go in and tell my boss, with fear and trembling, what I had done. And by the grace of God and Jack Wilson and whoever else I worked with him for, not only did I keep my job, but the people that I worked with still wanted me to handle their accounts. I couldn't believe it. I had a track record by that point that was strong enough that I was able to absorb that huge error. Well, that's the way the world works. But with Jesus, it's nice to have a good track record, but even if we don't, guess what? We still belong to Him. We still belong to you. Have confidence. Have confidence. Would you bow your heads with me for a